logging on right now. So just give us 1 second as we get everything situated. I'm going to make sure that we're live streaming on Xiaoletong and YouTube. And there we go. Yeah, sorry about this. I feel like I'm hearing myself in double because I've got live streams all around. All right. Welcome everybody to Tuesday Talks. I know that there are a lot of people signed up for this talk and coming in slowly. So I'm going to give everybody a second here to get situated. While we're doing that, I'm going to go ahead and share our screen so that if you would like to have some Chinese translation, 如果需要中文翻译的话，扫一下小儿童的二维码。Sorry, my Chinese is like really gone to the trash since moving to the US. I'm gonna keep working on it. But yes, if you need Chinese, you can always scan the 小儿童 QR code. And if for some reason, I know around the world, sometimes Zoom doesn't cooperate. So if Zoom is not cooperating for you during the session, you can always go to our YouTube channel and it's streaming there as well. And you can see it there. You can also ask questions there. I will see those and make sure that those get fed over here. We will be doing a few polls today. So, and we'll have our chat box and our Q&A box. So maybe have all those things kind of ready to open so that if you are ready and wanting to ask a question or wanting to give some input, we're going to see it and be ready for it. And while everybody's doing that, just want to say another thank you to our Tuesday Talk sponsor schools. We could not be doing Tuesday Talks without you. Thank you for getting the word out and getting your friends to come and your parents' friends to come. This is a fun place every Tuesday for us to kind of get to know students and schools and parents from all over the world. And so we're really excited for you guys to be here. So without further ado, I am going to ask my esteemed guests to introduce themselves. One of them is on the way. She is currently probably parking her car after being stuck in some traffic, but she will be here in a second. But maybe Amy and Ryan, you all can start and introduce yourself real quickly, where you're from, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, thanks so much, Gloria. My name is Amy Tompkinson. I'm one of the Associate Deans of Admission at Carleton College in Northfield, Minnesota. And a fun fact about me is one of the most important experiences of my life was my study abroad experience in Indonesia when I was doing my bachelor's degree, which really kind of led me into the career that I have now, working with international students. So it was a very important experience. So I'll pass it to Ryan.
Thanks, Amy. And thank you to Gloria and Initial View and the entire team for having us today. So excited to be here. Really grateful that we continue to have this space to gather together, even as we get to do more things out in the world these days. My name is Ryan Ricciardi. I am here from Bowdoin College. I was thinking about fun facts about myself, and it's weird to find a fun fact about yourself. So I have two. One might be more interesting to you than the other, who knows? So my first one is that I'm a former archaeologist. So one of the ways I got into the international space is that I used to travel around the world and literally get my hands dirty digging into culture and history and artifacts. So I love all of those pieces. And then equally dirty, but less intellectual, is my extreme love of baking and particularly perfecting the chocolate chip cookie recipe. I am a little obsessive about whether or not you refrigerate your dough ahead of time, how you scoop it, how much chocolate. So if you ever want advice on chocolate chip cookies, or at least my perspective on it, you know where to come find me.
Awesome. And I always forget to introduce myself when I open it up, but my name is Gloria. I'm one of the co-founders at Initial View. Fun fact about myself is I also enjoy baking. I actually prefer cooking though, because I find that my measuring is not always super exact. And I also really like to sing karaoke. So that's a fun fact about myself that I'd love to share. Anyway, I want to know who's here. So I do have a quick poll here to see who you are. And you're not able to tell us your fun facts unless you want to type it in the chat. Yeah, would love to know who you are, kind of where you are in the process. And that's always helpful for us when we are having our conversation so that we know kind of what to focus on. So it looks like 60% of you have taken the poll. If you can't see the poll, like there should be, I don't know, a little thing that pops up. So awesome. It looks like we have a good mix and quite a few people who are getting ready to apply to college this coming fall. So this is a fun, exciting activity that we have for you today. So that you can kind of imagine what it's going to be like when people are reading your applications. So, wonderful. Yep. It looks like the majority of you are applying in fall of 2025. Woohoo! All right. So, oh, actually, that means sophomores. Okay, we've got juniors and sophomores. All right. So, today we're going to do a fun activity where we're going to pretend that we are all like getting to sit in the room with admissions officers from a college called Nightingale College. And so I believe I'm going to give it over to our guests to have them share and start the process.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. So one of the greatest mysteries in the whole process is what happens when you submit your application. So today we're here to really talk about what happens next, that review process, and we're in it together. So you are part of an admissions committee. A friend of mine always says, congratulations, the work is really rewarding, the pay sucks. So you're in it for the work and the joy, and that's great because for the next hour, we're going to have some fun. I think, is our first question ready to go? Can we ask that first in the poll?
Yep. Hold on one second.
Thank you. Before we get started, before we start to talk about the place that we are going to work, we're going to start out without any information. What we want to know from you is, what do you think is the most important part of the application review? And you have some options here. So go ahead and choose one. No judgment. This is anonymous. Can't see who you are. And Gloria, maybe you can tell us where we stand in terms of how things are coming in.
Yeah, so right now it's looking like grades and personal qualities are eking it in the front here. We've got extracurricular activities not too far behind. Personal qualities is winning out over grades right now. But just barely. It's kind of going back and forth, back and forth. We've got maybe 60% of people have taken the poll. Yep, personal quality is still winning at 67%.
This is like a horse race. Very exciting.
I know. It's very exciting. We've got 67% thinking personal qualities. Oh, now 67% grades and personal qualities tied. So
I love it.
And so extracurricular activities is at 46% right now. The curriculum is at 41%. Testing's only at 20%, and we've got 25% saying it depends.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you all for starting off with that. And thank you for participating. And I want you to keep that question in mind as we go through this whole exercise. Just think about what you answered and how you think about the different parts of the application. And for now, remember, we're all working for the same school. So we are going to work for Nightingale College. So as we think about going through the application and as we think about reading, remember that this is the institution that is paying us to do the work. And so we have to consider all of these different factors as we go through. So Nightingale is a small liberal arts college located in upstate New York. So that is away from the city. We are not in the middle of New York City. We are probably a 4 to 5 hour drive away from that. And we are relatively sort of average on the big side, I would say, for liberal arts colleges, but generally speaking, a small school when you look at all the different types of schools across the United States. We are entirely undergraduate, so there are no graduate students there, and our average class size is about 15. So it's small. It's the attention is on the students and the learning and the research experiences. 95% of our students live on campus, so it is a highly residential space. And we have students from all over the country and all over the world. And we have a new incoming president who is creating this Center for International Leadership. So thinking about how we are holding space for people engaged in the international world, whether that's through citizenship or through interest, academic, or activity, that's going to be important to us. If we're thinking about sort of academics, we should go into the next section, which is to say our average IB results, so that's one type of curriculum, is going to be 40. That does include the bonus points. Our TOEFL minimum, so that is your English proficiency test, is going to be 100. And we are SAT and ACT optional. So that means that you can be admitted to Nightingale without submitting your test scores. And you can submit your test scores if you choose, they will be considered. So test optional. As far as interviews go, they are optional, but highly recommended. We really like to get to know our applicants beyond the application, and interviews, like the ones that Initial View offers you the opportunity to do, are a great way to do that. And we are highly selective. So 25% of students who apply are admitted. And we practice what's called holistic admissions, which means we are going to really think about the entirety of the person presented, because you're going to contribute to life inside the classroom and life outside the classroom in our spaces. And to go through the different parts of the application and how they contribute to our understanding of you, I'm going to pass it over to my colleague, Amy.
Yeah, thanks so much. So it is important to know that with holistic admission, we do want to get to know you as a person beyond your grades. Obviously, we still need your grades to review the academic side of your application, but you'll see that there are quite a few items that you'll usually be asked to submit for an institution that is doing holistic admission. So the first step is to submit the common application or the coalition application. That's what our Nightingale College accepts. And part of that application will be your personal essay. And the personal essay is really where you can you have total control over the personal essay. You decide what you want to write about. And it's one of the things that we really value in the holistic review process, is what you have to tell us in that personal essay. So there will also be in the application, you'll also the students will also tell us demographic information, parent information, extracurricular involvements, leadership, all those types of things that tell us what the student is doing outside of the classroom. Usually with the common application and the coalition application, there will be a supplement that's specific to the institution. So for Nightingale College, we have some supplemental essays set up. Sometimes, generally speaking, these are kind of more institutionally specific, because the common application or the coalition application is just a general application. We also require letters of recommendation. We want to know what you are like as a student from a teacher perspective or a counselor perspective. We do need a transcript in your school report. We want to look at the final 4 years of secondary school. We will look at your test scores if you provide them, and then again, the optional interview to gain additional insights into the applicant's background and maybe fit with the institution. So those are, generally speaking, what we're going to be asking for from our applicants, and through our activity, you'll see more about these different components. And I will pass it over to Kathleen, who just joined us.
Hi there, great to be with you all today. Thanks for joining us. I am really excited to talk a little bit more about the ways in which the application process allows us to better get to know you, to really think in a meaningful way about who you'll be when you get to our college or university. And today we're really thinking about who these 3 students will be when they get to Nightingale. So in a moment, I'm going to introduce our exercise, what we're all charged with today, and really sort of want to center the conversation surrounding these 3 factors. So we're going to talk about academic factors, right? When we're thinking about any college or university, we want to make sure students are going to be able to be successful academically on our campus. So the first question admission officers often ask is, do we think the student will thrive academically? That doesn't mean that you won't have challenges, right? Of course, that's part of it, but we want to make sure that you're in a position to be able to take those challenges head on and to have the resources on campus to support you, to allow you to be pushed and challenged and shaped and changed, and truly to become a scholar in your own right. And so we already talked a little bit about some of those academic factors that allow us to get a sense of, okay, can this person be successful on our campus? We'll think about your grades, the curriculum you're in, and how the recommendation letters further strengthen our understanding of how you contribute to the intellectual life of your classrooms. We think about personal and community factors, right? We think a lot about, as Ryan said, who you'll be outside the classroom. We already know that this is a residential community. You're going to engage in really exciting ways in the classroom and in really exciting ways outside the classroom. And so that idea of how will you engage in our community is impacted by every component of the application. This also really focuses on this idea of context, right? So when we think about sort of personal community factors, I like to think about it in terms of 4 contexts. We think about you in the context of your high school experience, right? How have you taken advantage of what's been available to you at your current school? We think about you in the context of your home life, right? Maybe you're the first in your family to go to a 4-year college or university. Maybe you're the first person to be thinking about going to college in the United States. Maybe you have significant family responsibilities. You're someone who's taking care of your grandparents or taking care of a younger sibling, right? All of those sort of impact how you think about community and the ways in which we think you'll contribute to our college experience. We think about you in the context of COVID-19, recognizing that it has impacted all of us, but in different ways, right? And then the final context we think about is you in the context of our applicant pool. We only have the privilege of considering students who have chosen to apply to our institutions. And that's where this sort of broader idea of overall fit really comes into play. We're not making a value judgment, right? Your admission to any institution is not a reflection of your worth or value as a person. Instead, it's a reflection of really hard decisions that these institutions have to make, and seeking to make the decision that's both best for you and best for this community. And so as Ryan was introducing Nightingale, right, that's really sort of how we want to center this conversation. Who is going to impact Nightingale? How are we able to articulate that and sort of moving forward in terms of making a decision? All right, so hopefully everyone's warmed up and ready to go. I always like to say that, you know, we get to offer you a job in admission. The pay's not great, but it is really meaningful work. So over the next 40 minutes. You might not be compensated super well monetarily, i.e. you won't be, but hopefully this is a really fun and engaging exercise. So what's going to happen is Amy, Ryan, and I are going to introduce you to 3 fantastic applicants for Nightingale. We're going to sort of layer pieces of the application to give you sort of introductions to different components of who they are and who we think they'll be at Nightingale. And after sort of each introduction to their sort of background, their academic factors, other sort of personal and community factors, we're going to ask you to vote to admit just one of these 3 really compelling students. I also encourage you to use the chat, right? One of the ways in which this is really different from our committees is that there's not just a lot of talking at, right? There's a lot of conversation. So if you have questions, if there are other components of this student that you want to hear about, please let us know. We look forward to hearing what you are thinking through in the chat. But without further ado, we're going to sort of move into this exercise and asking you to work with us to create this class for Nightingale. And I get to start by introducing you to Arthur. So Arthur is one of our 3 fantastic applicants. He has had a lot of lived experiences across the globe. He was born in London. He currently lives in Singapore. And he goes to a high school that we are really familiar with at Nightingale. It's often considered one of the top schools in Singapore, whatever that might mean, right? And we think a lot about sort of the way in which he has had different lived experiences across 2 continents, and the way in which sort of his desire to go to a place like Nightingale to engage not just in the classroom, but out of the classroom with these different lived experiences would help build and foster and strengthen this international community that our president is so excited about. So I'm really excited for the ways in which he'll engage and sort of further that mission of thinking about internationalism. I'm going to pass things over to Amy to introduce Kieran.
Yes, so Kieran is one of our other really highly qualified applicants, and she has a very compelling story of how she spent most of her younger life in rural India and then moved to the big city in Delhi. And various components of her application sort of exemplify her ability to be adaptable, to take on new challenges, to be successful in a new environment. And in fact, she is going to be the first in her family to finish high school. Not only that, the first in her family to go on to college. So it's a really interesting mix that we want to create in our incoming class of students who bring these different perspectives. And so she would have a really valuable perspective in the community and in the classroom about that rural to urban transition, and also being what we would call a first generation student. So I'll pass it over to Ryan for the introduction of Jiawen.
All right, so I'm here as Jiawen's advocate. He was born and continues to live in Beijing. We have a long history of bringing students from China. And so actually Jiawen's father also attended Nightingale, which makes him a legacy. So his understanding of Nightingale has gone through generations now. And his connection to the college is one that we are really interested in and really excited by. Okay. So after biographical information, I think we're going to go to academics next. And then after academics, we'll get to our first question for you all. So I'm going to pass it back to Kat.
All right, so back to Arthur. So you can see on this chart some of the factors that we would be considering at Nightingale in terms of understanding who Arthur will be when he gets to our classrooms. So we have recalculated these GPAs on a 100-point scale. You can see that he has about a 90 average, and it's ascending, which means he is on an upward trajectory, right? Not every student goes to a high school that ranks, but we happen to know that Arthur is in the top 20% of his high school. Again, we consider this this is considered a top high school in Singapore, and he's in an AP curriculum. He hasn't taken advantage of all the APs that are available to him, but he's been really thoughtful in his approach to engaging in AP courses in the subjects he is most interested in. So you can see that he's taken AP Calculus BC, AP Stats, and AP Chemistry, and he has sort of rounded out his curricular options with non-advanced placement history and English. We think that he's someone who has a really clear understanding of what he wants to study and how he wants to engage in his academic life. And so while maybe his curriculum could be a little bit stronger, the sort of impact of him doing better each year as his curriculum has increased in rigor is really exciting in answering who we think Arthur will be when he gets to our classrooms. He also chose to submit his testing, which is, well within sort of a mid 50% range. And I would just say that while the testing is here, we're going to spend a lot more time thinking about the impact of him in our classrooms. At a small liberal arts college, pretty rare that you take a lot of multiple choice tests, right? And so his work in the classroom, we feel, is a much better indication of who he'll be. I'll turn things back to Amy.
Thanks so much. Okay, so Kieran, what we see from Kieran's academic transcript is that she is very consistent. She has a 95 out of 100 grade point average. And when we say flat, that means that her grades are very consistent. It's not up and down, it's not going down, she's a solid student. And that is really reflected in the class rank because she's in the top 4% of her class. So she's academically top of her game. She is studying in an Indian National Curriculum high school. So she's doing senior secondary classes, and she is really focusing in on the sciences and STEM majors. She is taking English, math, physics, chemistry, and computer science, but in her application, she's also indicated that she's really interested in the humanities and how the humanities might interact with these more STEM-related areas. So we see that she's got those interests. She's well prepared. She didn't submit an SAT or an ACT, but we don't require that, so we don't want to disadvantage her because of that, but we do have a TOEFL score of 115, and our minimum requirement at Nightingale College is a 100, so it's well above that minimum score. So she's going to be able to jump in, be really successful in her classes at Nightingale. I'll pass it to Ryan.
And then we have Joan, who has really been consistently high B, low A. So his average has been 92. And he's in the Chinese national curriculum. And so we know he's really being pushed in the classroom. These are tough classes that he's taking. And so that high A, low B, that to me shows me that he can do the work here. And his teachers, or his grades rather, have gotten him to the point that he's in the top 10% of his class. And so doing really well and sort of a standout in his own academic context. You can see the classes that he's been able to take. We know that the Chinese national curriculum can be more rigid than an American curriculum. So he hasn't had necessarily the same types of options that we would expect from a domestic student. But that's fine because we can see that he's really getting the education, getting a lot out of the education that's in front of him and taking advantage of those opportunities. While we do not have his SAT scores, we don't really judge one way or the other about why that is. So it doesn't really matter to us. We do have his TOEFL, which is 112, and that is totally fine. I have full confidence in his ability to jump right into a classroom in his second language and really thrive. Okay, So now you have just a little bit of academic context about the three candidates that we have in front of us as an admissions committee. So let's pull up the poll, and with the context that you have, which is really just their academic pathway, who would you vote to admit right now?
Okay, so people are taking the poll. We've got a quarter of the people, a third of the people taking it. And so far, Kieran is winning. Kieran is winning by a whole lot. 70% of you think that Kieran should be the one admitted. We've got a few votes. 25%, 23% of you are thinking Jawan, and 14% are thinking Arthur. This is continuing to move. We're taking, again, 60%. Where is the other 40%? We've got 60% of the people taking the poll. Where everybody else, do you not see the poll on your screen? If you don't, you can type in the chat who you want to vote for. But yeah,
no
right
wrong
now,
answers. No wrong
there
answers.
is no wrong answers. And we're still in the process here. Yeah, it's hard to vote. It's hard to vote, right?
Yeah, it is hard to vote. What a perfect comment to make right now.
Yes, we don't have the full picture, but we do have some of the picture. And so far, based on that picture, Kieran has won with 63% of the vote.
A resounding victory for Kieran.
Resounding. Wonderful. So I'll move on to the next slide.
All right. So, right, we get to see this sort of layering. We have this first introduction to, who they are, where they've lived. We get this sort of second introduction to their academic experience. And now we get to see some of the qualitative components of the application, right? As an institution that practices holistic admission, we're not just looking at a transcript. We're not just looking at testing, right? There are plenty of institutions across the globe that would only look at the information on those first two slides and make their decision. But Nightingale College is not that type of institution. So this is an amazing sort of opportunity to rethink about who you're most compelled by. And I'm really excited to make the case for Arthur, okay? So we saw in terms of Arthur's course selection that he was really, really interested in STEM classes. And not only is that something that he's been able to pursue in the classroom, but he's also been able to do this outside the classroom. He conducts his own science research, and more than that, he brought his love of science experiments to another educational site. So this idea of sort of who he'd be outside the classroom is beginning to crystallize for me, and I hope for you too, right? This intellectual curiosity in terms of how you think about posing big questions and searching for answers is something that Arthur is excited about and excited to do in a collaborative sense. I also love that he chose to talk about an experience with failure. If you're going to be a scientist, you need to get comfortable with failing, right? That's a part of all of our lives. And he really embraced how his experience with learning what failure means in a lab has impacted his willingness to take risks and step outside of his comfort zone in other parts of his life. And there are moments when we get to the privilege of sort of reading your application where we feel like each component is just allowing us to get a fuller picture of who you are and what you value. And this is sort of the final addition that we have are these letters of recommendation, which really highlight what we have already begun to know, that Arthur is an exceptional researcher, and he spends a lot of time and energy on his research projects. What also becomes clear is that maybe he's not reaching his full potential in the classroom, because the way in which he's been sort of singularly focused on his experiments and research sometimes means that he lacks focus and turns in other assignments late. I'd ask you to think about the way in which he will engage academically at Nightingale. And if the sort of opportunities for research at Nightingale will satiate his interests and allow him actually to be the student that we know he is, right? So think about sort of who he'll be at Nightingale with this really clear and exciting engagement in STEM courses, in STEM research, and in a collaborative approach to learning. I'm really excited about Arthur, and I hope you are too. All right, on to Kieran.
Yeah, I'm really excited to continue to advocate for Kieran. We know from her academics that she is very STEM focused, but what I really am pleased to see is that she is really involved outside of the classroom. And this is something that we want to see in our incoming student body. She's been doing traditional dance since she was very young. And this has also led her to be involved in the school theater club. And she hasn't had any like starring roles, but she's been involved in like the chorus and also some supporting roles. And because of her background, coming from a rural background, she has devoted over 300 hours of volunteering back in her home community when she's been able to be back on breaks and vacations. So I can see her being really involved both in the classroom and outside the classroom at Nightingale College. In her essay, we learn that her mother was she's very brilliant, and she feels like she gets this brilliance partially from her mother. Her mother did not have the same opportunities that she has gotten. If you remember, she's the first to graduate from high school. So this is something that she is hungry for more. She is really values the opportunities that she's gotten, and I think she'll really take advantage of everything that Nightingale College has to offer. And her recommendations really attest to that. She's grown so much. She's matured as a person. She really wants to give back to her community because of this experience that she's had moving from a rural environment to an urban environment. So I think that Kieran would really be an ideal candidate to add to our student body at Nightingale College.
And to go back to Jawen, I really want to focus in on this idea of extracurriculars, because we know that outside of the US and outside of international schools, it's really hard to ask students to do more than go through their academic day. And yet, Jawen has actually founded this environmental club. He is the organizer and he plays basketball games at school. He is on the debate team. We could see a lot of leadership coming through here and a lot of initiative. And he's doing this beyond the expectations that we would have for him. So really showing us that even in a context that doesn't sort of facilitate extracurriculars in the same way as an American school would, he's going out of his way to show that community matters. This passion that he has for environmental awareness and for this club really comes out in his essay. He co-founds this sustainability club, and he talks a lot about the impact that they've been able to have, both on how people think about the environment, but also changing behaviors. And so he is really showing us time and again that not just taking the initiative, but being a change maker. He, in his letters of recommendation, is called determined and athletic and really sharp and bright. He did have a slower start, I think, in the classroom. They talk about how he was really quiet and he wasn't going to engage with a lot of his peers or with his teacher early on. But he has really come into his own over the last couple of years and really blossomed. And I think a lot of that is because he seems to be sort of starting to find his passion, his drive, which is bringing these ideas of the academic and community together in this environmental awareness, environmental sustainability club. And so I think there are a lot of ways that you can see Jawen really making an impact here and coming to Nightingale and being a change maker. All right. So now you have the next layer of information. We've gone beyond the academics. You have to hold to the academic information here too. So now you have both things to carry, but we're going to ask you to take the poll again. So after the academic information, you took the poll, and now you have the extracurriculars, the essay, and the recommendations to layer on to that academic information. Who would you vote to admit now?
Okay. Votes are coming in. We're at 40%, and ooh, it's closer this time. We've got 40. Kieran's still in the lead. She's at 45% right now, but Jowin is coming up. He's got 35% of the vote right now. And Arthur, there are still people voting for him at 21%, and I still have less than 70% of the people voting. But yeah, if you want to chat, if you can't see, I see on YouTube here, people were voting for Jowin earlier. So Jowin got a couple more votes over there. But yeah, I think we've gotten about 70% participation. And right now, Kieran is still in the lead at 44% of the vote, Jowin at 36, and Arthur at 20.
All right, so let's build off that 20%, shall we? All right, so thinking a little bit about Arthur and now really, continuing this idea of who he'll be at Nightingale, right? There's this sort of term demonstrated interest that you might have heard or you might hear over the course of your search. Really, this is can mean different things at different institutions. But it's a way of knowing that a student has engaged meaningfully with a college or university. We think about context when thinking about demonstrated interest, right? Not every student is able to visit the United States, certainly. It's a really small percentage of our international student applicant pool who is. But if you do visit campus, that shows us an interest, right? An engagement in this process and really a desire to learn more about us. So Arthur was able to visit campus. And what I think is more important than his visit to campus is that he chose to have an interview with an alum in our office. And the way in which he asked questions about their Nightingale experience really shows that he internalized how he's considering what Nightingale will mean for him, right? And so he had this really awesome alumni interview. He showed a clear and deep intellectual curiosity surrounding his interest in science. And this alum made clear that Nightingale would be all the better for Arthur's presence on our campus. He's thoughtfully considered sort of the opportunities to continue doing his STEM research, to connect that with other community members. And he knows a few other current students as well. So we have this sort of strong connection with his school, and there are students on our campus that he's been able to connect with. So for me, I really feel like Arthur is someone who not only will engage really in exciting and meaningful ways, but who's someone who is very likely to say yes to our offer of admission, right? So for me, Arthur feels like a really exciting choice. He'll continue to grow and develop, continuing that ascending trajectory, his deep engagement in the sciences, his collaborative approach to learning, and the connections he's already making in this community make me really, really excited to tell you about Arthur and to sort of say that he's the person for me that I really see flourishing and thriving on this campus. All right, Amy, take it away.
Okay, Kieran. So Kieran has participated in a way to demonstrate her interest. Granted, she doesn't have the funding available to visit campus, but she has engaged with us in a virtual way. She emailed us to ask about different academic programs and was really interested in connecting with one of our chemistry professors about some of the research that she was doing. So that connection has been made, but she hasn't had the chance to come to campus. Some additional pieces of information: her father passed away. We didn't know that from other parts of her application. So, she's really relying on the guidance counselors in her high school to help her navigate this process of coming to the United States. She did not do an interview. However, I want to remind you that interviews are optional. It is an opportunity for us to get additional information about an applicant, but it's not something that we should use as a negative factor in her consideration. It would have been great if she could have done an interview, but that was not the case. So I'll pass it back to Ryan to talk about Jiawen.
All right. So Jiawen was lucky enough to visit campus. It was his dad's 25th reunion. So dad came back to campus, brought his whole family. It was really exciting. One of the first things, travel opportunities they've had since the pandemic. Everybody on campus was really excited to have sort of all of this energy around. And while he was there, he stopped by and met with an admissions officer. We were also able to go to visit him. And so we were able to visit China for the first time during his junior year. We're going to call that a virtual visit because that will not have been possible last fall when he was a junior. So during that virtual visit, he met with an admissions officer and really had great questions. Remember that legacy factor that he has been really connected to Nightingale for his whole life, really knows this place, and clearly a place that really mattered to his father. He submitted an initial view interview, and in this interview, he delved into his love of environmental studies. So really drawing out that connection of why sustainability matters to him, that commitment to basketball and sort of how he was the organizer of it. Really talks about how he's eager to do new things, to have new opportunities. He also really talked about that sense of connectivity across culture and interculturalism. And I just want to remind us all that we have this new president with a new international leadership commitment. And I think that he would be a really great fit with this new initiative that we have, with his connection to Nightingale, with all of this connection to sustainability and impact-minded opportunity. So I'm really here to advocate for him. And I think that he would be a really great fit for us academically, but also making impact in areas of campus that matter to us and matter to our new president as well. All right. So now you have all of the information about the candidate, all of them. So it is time to make your final decision. This is it. This is the person.
Okay,
Oh, sorry.
Before we do that, Ryan, like there was a question here. And so I think that maybe like if people have questions, like I see all the information, but you guys are the ones who read the application. So I need a little bit more color. So if there are questions like Jean asked, is Kieran at a high school that may not have understood what an interview could do for her? Did she have internet access? So if anybody else has questions, you can ask them now. And and I hope that as everybody's been watching, or you can see, like, there is a person in the admissions office who is advocating for each of you. And so they're making arguments for you. And then sometimes there might be, like Kat said earlier, a discussion that happens within the committee room, right?
And I just wanted to add, I put a note in the chat in response to that. And since Kieran is coming from a high school that we don't have a lot of students from, we maybe don't have as close a connection with that counselor. And so so in this instance, we might not be sure if the counselor maybe encouraged or maybe saw that it was optional and say, so you don't have to do that. You're a busy student. You've got other stuff to do. But since she is in an urban area, we were assuming that she did have access to the internet and potentially could have done an interview. So yes, and we can only admit one. It's hard choices.
All right, so I have turned on the poll. People can still ask questions or make comments while they're voting. But yeah, it is very, very hard and people are torn. Right now, all of a sudden, Jawan's looking better on on the poll, and Jawan's at 50% of the vote right now. We're at about 50% of the people on the call voting. But I think there are probably people struggling right now with the vote, and so they're kind of moving the mouse back and forth between a few people. But at this very point in time, it looks like we're at 51% for Jawan. Do they have any competitions or papers that didn't show that are not here in the information we let out?
So we don't ask for students to submit papers. We know that students are doing a ton of work. So we don't have papers for anyone. It's fine that we don't have papers. Honestly, if Arthur, for example, had submitted a paper on, say, physics research, I wouldn't really understand it because physics is something that has always been confusing to me. But we don't have any more information than what we have right here to make the decision.
Gloria, are you able to go back to the Nightingale slide?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. Some people have asked to see kind of the targets here. Give me 1 second.
What I would say to the question about sort of like additional papers or pieces of that, or, you know, competitions, awards, it's so rarely what a student does, and so much more how a student is able to reflect on that. It's very rare that I will advocate for a student because they did X. It's so much more common that I will advocate for a student because of their reflections on how an experience impacted them, right? So, while, you know, certainly we have more information when we're reviewing an application than what fits on the sort of slides that we've shared, I just want to say that sort of our approach and how we think about a student's engagement is really surrounding their reflection instead of any sort of one experience.
So here we have Nightingale College's slide, and then for those who are asking, also the components of an application again. So just these three, I'm going to kind of flip back and forth here. Any other comments before we move on to kind of the next poll question? It's hard. It's
what
really,
percentage
really hard.
Of people have voted, Gloria? Where are we?
So 73% of the audience has voted, which is a pretty good poll rating. And right now, Jawan is at 51% of the vote. And, you know, like, I think the question continues to be like, are all the factors equally weighted? Which of them are most important?
You get to decide, right? Like that's the part of this that is challenging, right? Like they're all students who we think would be successful, and so so their academics are putting them in a place where they can be successful at Nightingale. There are different ways in which they'll contribute, but they will all contribute meaningfully to the community outside the classroom. And also, we know that there are ways in which they'll contribute to some of the mission and sort of vision and values that they have articulated through the international from the president, right? So just wanting to sort of say that it's fair to feel conflicted and it's fair to feel uncertain because we put 3 compelling students to you and are asking you to do some really, really hard work. There are lots of questions about sort of going through again, and I think unfortunately we don't have time for that. So maybe 30 more seconds to get in your vote, and then we'll have a few minutes for questions.
Well, and I will just say this is recorded, and so if you want to go back to the archive and watch it again, you are welcome to do that. Maybe watch it with your parents or some friends and be like, "What would you have done?" But this is you're getting a taste of how difficult sometimes it is. Like when it comes down to the wire, and you're like, "I only have one spot, and I've got these wonderful, wonderful candidates." And people said that the academics, like we have done some like other Tuesday talks where the admissions officers say 75, 80, 85, even 90% of their applicants are academically qualified. They meet they are going to do great. And so that's why all these other factors come into play. So Jawen, 52%. And so it looks like we might be admitting Jawen. So I'm gonna watch this poll. Did you change your mind? Okay, it looks like we've got 66, 69%, 70% said they didn't change their mind. No, did your answer change? No. That doesn't make sense mathematically, but did your answer change? Okay, so it looks like 35% of the people who have answered so far, their answer did change, and the others didn't. And so it may be that all these people who didn't vote are now voting. So it's a little bit hard for us to see what is happening. But someone on the chat says, I changed my answer twice. Like each layer added another piece of information to help. Someone is asking, might luck be involved? Arthur might be unusual in the pool compared to another applicant.
Yeah, I think it'd be helpful to talk about sort of the ways in which this is like processes and the ways in which it isn't, right? So Ryan, do you want to sort of kick us off with that?
I'll start, and then everybody can obviously chime in, because this is artificial, right? We do not compare candidates to each other. So what I want students and educators and parents to take away from this is that we do not go 3 applicants in a row and compare academics, and then compare extracurriculars, and then compare other factors. That's not how it goes. When I'm presenting a candidate in committee, I present the entire candidate, and then we come to consensus on a decision for that candidate, and then we move on to the next one. We are also presenting as territory managers. So I have expertise in China, in Asia, in the Middle East. Those are my territories, and I have the ability to answer people's questions like, is Arthur actually taking advantage of all the opportunities at this really great school? It's a really great school, but if he's not doing much at it, should we be considering him? That I have the background knowledge to understand what our history is with that school and how this all comes together for Arthur, right? And we do this one at a time. So I want to make sure everyone knows you are never compared to another candidate. Your decision is the decision that we make for you. And then we move on to the next candidate. And I want to acknowledge there is a part of this that's real. It's really hard. It's a really hard job to come to a consensus about students who are all academically qualified, more or less, and are all really engaging in the world in really different ways. So that part, I think, I just want to acknowledge every comment here that was like, this is hard, and I don't know how to make this decision. We get that. It's hard work. But I do want everybody to feel assured that you are treated as your own person and never brought up against somebody else. Do you want to weigh in on other parts of how this is different than the way that we do it?
Well, I think Brian, you summarized that perfectly. It is really an artificial setup the way we've done this and comparing 3 specific people. But I want to go back to something that Kathleen said earlier that I think is really important. And what she was trying to convey, and I just want to reiterate, is that if you're not admitted to a particular school that is highly selective, it's not a reflection on your abilities and your future success, because it's so hard and we do have limited spaces. So I just wanted to put that out there to reiterate that. That's one of the main takeaways we want you to go away with, is that if it were me, I would have admitted all three of them. So, because they're all delightful, but in this activity, we could only admit one. So.
I think the sort of final framing is these were all good decisions, right? There's not a right or a wrong decision. We have to make sort of a series of good decisions. And sometimes that means sort of, being heartbroken as admission officers, really advocating for someone, and that just not coming together. So Arthur, you're going to be amazing wherever you wind up. It might not be Nightingale, but I know you're going to contribute meaningfully, right? And I hope you know that the time and energy and effort you're putting into these applications are really valued and appreciated on the other end. And what is real, as Ryan mentioned earlier, is that you have an advocate in each of us. So I hope you know that we're working really hard to have your voice come through. And Gloria put up our last poll. Just interested now, gone through this process, what do you think is the most important piece of the application review?
So personal qualities continues to win out. Personal qualities continues to be at 74%, 75% right now. I think that's the most important component. And there's not really a close second. Now grades are still probably the second most important on that list, but not as much as it was when we first started this conversation. We've got 23%. It depends. But yeah, personal qualities is winning out now as the most important component. I think this has been, again, we're trying to give you a little taste of what it might feel like as an admissions officer when they're looking at your materials. We wanted to give you a little taste of knowing that there is someone in the office who is advocating for you. It's not just like your things are thrown in a pile and then, people are actually spending time on your file and then consolidating that information and then bringing it to a place where people can have a conversation about you. So that's really a great way to kind of think about it when you're telling your story. And so we wanted to give you a taste, but it's by no means, everyone's asking the three of you, what would you have done? Who would you have chosen? Each of you were advocating for your own. So do you want to weigh in on who you would have selected?
No.
We made up this exercise, so we picked the characteristics of them.
I think the problem of saying who we would have chosen sort of raises one profile above the other. And what I want to go back to is Amy's point of we could have and maybe would have admitted all three in the same year, because they are all people who are engaging with the world in a way that matters to them and taking advantage of opportunities in the context in which they are being educated and living. That's what's important. You want to be as authentic as possible in your application, because the person you are is going to be the person who shows up on our campuses to make a difference. So it kind of doesn't matter who we would choose in this exercise, because each person here could have and would have and should have, in many instances, been admitted to a college that they were applying to. And for Nightingale, we made a decision in this moment that was right for us for right now. And Jiawen is the one out of these three who was admitted. And that's a great decision for Nightingale and hopefully a great outcome for Jiawen. But in terms of us selecting who we would admit, depending on the day, it would be all of them.
Wonderful. Well, I really appreciate Amy, Ryan, and Kathleen for staying online for an extra 4 minutes. And it was so fun being able to do this exercise with you all. If you all have questions about these specific colleges, which are wonderful, wonderful liberal arts institutions, please make sure to reach out to them. If you're like, oh, I've learned a lot about kind of how an admission officer could advocate, but I don't really know how to tell my story, you really need to come to the next few Tuesday talks. We're doing one on essays next week in the time of ChatGPT, which will be super interesting. We're going to be doing a What's Your Story the week after, and we're going to be talking about interviews the week after. So a lot of this whole how do we get our personal characteristics and qualities out in the actual application. So tune in for that. I'm going to hang out here for another 15, 20 minutes. If people have specific questions about interviews and initial view, I'm going to hang out because a lot of people often have questions for that. But I'm going to let my colleagues go and enjoy their day. They have lots of busy things that they need to be doing. And I really, really appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us for Tuesday Talks, everyone. All right. Well, if anybody wants to stay on, you're welcome to, but you also probably have things busy. You're either needing to go to bed or moving on to another activity. But if you do have questions about initial view, please feel free to kind of ask them in the Q&A box or in the chat box right now. If you have any questions related to interviews generally, this is the time to ask as well. Just for those of you who've never logged into a Tuesday Talk before and don't know what Initial View is, we are an interview platform, a third-party interview platform. And so students can come to Initial View, do an interview, one interview that they can send to as many schools as they'd like as they apply. And so all of those schools that were on the panel today, they accepted Initial View. That's why it ended up in as one of the components that we discussed. And yeah, so I'm here to answer any questions you might have. You're also more than welcome to email me directly if you have questions. If you don't feel like asking them now, my email is gloria@initialview.com. And then you should also follow all of our socials, because on MeetChat and on WhatsApp and Instagram and Facebook, all of those, Twitter, you can find information about Initial View there as well. So any questions right now? And for those of you who want to see the slides again, we will have this recording up on our website. We have, if you go to initialview.com/Tuesday Talks /archives, you can find all the recordings from past Tuesday Talks. We also have our recordings on the YouTube channel as well. So if you missed the first half and you want to see that again, feel free to log in and watch that. Or if you have a good friend or maybe a parent or a teacher that you want to kind of talk through the process with, feel free to do that as well. People still have questions about the case study. I mean, I just have to remind you that the case study is completely not real. So, but yeah, and sometimes the question here is, does Nightingale prefer students who have leadership instead of academic or research only? And I don't know if that's entirely true. I think, a lot of times when we talk about fit, you have to remember that a community needs all kinds of people to work out. If everybody was a leader, then it wouldn't feel good. So the thing we didn't touch on the case study too is a little bit of the shaping of a class. So we only got to the point of like, yes, this person should be admitted. But I think at the end of the process, there are leaders in an admissions team who will be then kind of looking and saying, like, we have too many people interested in STEM, and we don't have enough people interested in humanities, and that's going to make our community a little bit more unbalanced. I think Caltech wouldn't feel like that. Caltech and MIT probably want more STEM people, but they also, MIT has plenty of liberal arts, humanities majors. So all these things are taken into consideration as well. So it's very, very difficult to say like, oh, this school is looking for this particular person. They are looking to build a whole class. So there might have been in a situation, where other students, other applications that come in have a lot of academic research. So it's a hard question to answer, which at the end of the day, what means like for you, as you are thinking as a student or a parent, you really just want to think about what do I love to do and what do I really want to study and what makes me excited about spending each day, and if you wake up thinking about research, then yes, by all means, do a lot of research. If you're like, I'm not really a leader type, I'm much more a type who can help execute. So like somebody else has the vision and somebody else kind of leads the charge, but I'm a really good helper. Like I'm really detail oriented. And you just want to make sure that part of your story comes out. So that would be how I would want you to take, the takeaway from this is not so much like, oh, a school is looking for this type of student. It's more a school is looking for many, many kinds of students that will fit perfectly in that class that year. And you'll notice that there were some institutional goals, like if the president's like, we want it to be more internationally minded, then they are going to be looking for people that are have more global awareness and more wanting to be in that kind of community. Any other questions about initial view and interviews? Oh, there's a question here about what kind of questions we ask, and that's a really good question. I don't have a question bank for my interviewers. Instead, they have goals. They have goals where they want to understand a little bit about the academic background of a student. So they'll ask questions about what kind of curriculum you're in, what kind of courses you like. They are really trying to like illuminate some of your intellectual curiosity, because like I said earlier, if 80%, 85% of the applicants are all academically qualified, they want to see a little bit more of like imagining you in a classroom. So some of the questions are going to be related to your academic interests. Some of the questions are going to be related to how you spend your time outside of class, because sometimes that's a little bit harder to share on the application. Like, for example, extracurricular activities, you only have like, I think it's 150 characters. It's not a lot of space to write about your extracurricular activity. But if there's one that's been really meaningful to you, that you spend all your time doing, then you probably want to talk about it. And so our interviewers are going to ask you questions related to the things that you like to do outside of the classroom. But yeah, it is really going to be in some ways dictated by you as the student, and you get to kind of give us a little bit of information and then we'll keep asking you questions. So the real thing about an initial view interview is that it's not just a list of questions and then a list of answers. It's going to be more like question, answer, follow-up question, back and forth a little bit. And so it gives you a chance to kind of dive a little deeper on a few really meaningful things for you. Good question. Okay. Mock interviews, do we do them? We have a junior interview. So if you're not ready to apply yet, but you want to practice interviewing, we do have a junior interview available. You can find information on that on our website, or you can always email me if you have questions about that. But it is an opportunity for you to get the whole experience with a stranger. Sometimes it's easier to talk to a stranger than your friends or your parents because you feel a little awkward with them. And then you can practice with making sure you look good on a camera, the technology, but also you're able to have that full conversation. And then for the junior interview, we actually have an admission officer or a former admissions officer. They will actually record a short video back to you to give you some feedback so that you can kind of be aware, like, oh, I probably should have talked about this more, and I should have, or maybe I can develop this story more, or I You know, maybe I need to learn how to kind of look at the camera a little bit better, things like that. So it's a great opportunity if you're looking for a mock interview and you don't have a counselor or a friend who can help you through that process. All right, well, are there any other questions? Again, if you still have questions about the case study, you can always come back and watch the archive. It will be here within 12 hours. So you'll be able to see that, and then and all of our past talks can be watched again. All right, well, it looks like I might be able to wrap up it unless there's last call for any other questions. All right, well, I know this process can be very daunting and stressful. I myself have a junior. I have 3 teenagers, and my junior is about to enter this process as well. And so I know it can be very stressful. And I just want to remind you all that you all are worthy of getting into most of these schools, probably all of them. But your worth is not in which school you get into. You're going to be able to get into the school that is the right fit for you, and you're going to be able to take advantage of that opportunity and really learn a lot and contribute to your community, and it's going to be so fun. I loved going to college. I did not get into my first choice, my dream school, but I ended up going to a school that I loved, and now, you know, now looking back, was like, that was my dream school. I just didn't know it at the time. So keep that in mind. And work hard, play hard, just enjoy this process, and make sure that you're being really thoughtful and authentic, and talk about it often. Come back to Tuesday Talks next week. We're looking forward to seeing you. Bye, everyone. Take care.